Should you be an Uber driver or a Lyft driver in 2025? I'm going to be honest right in the beginning of this video. I'm going to go very in depth about all the good and also the bad about being a driver. I'm going to talk about a lot of the technical elements. What is it like to drive? What should you know before driving? What is it like when it comes to insurances and your car situation and the requirements and a lot more? I'm going to be very blunt that one, this video is going to be a bit lengthy. The reason why is I do these every year. Like, should you drive for Lyft and Uber in 2022, 2023, 2024, and now 2025? And one, I'm going to go very in-depth. It's going to be a bit of a lengthy video. Two is for this video, rather than my other videos of things like, say, flying in and out and being very kind of fast-paced, this video I'm going to treat like a fireside chat style video, where it's going to be a very casual, free-flowing video where I'm going to tell you everything you really need to know about being a driver. Because I'm going to be honest, right in the beginning, in some cases, depending on your situation and a lot of other factors that I will be talking about in this video, in some cases, you definitely should drive. And there's a lot of benefits to being a driver, and I'll talk about those. That being said, there's also a lot of negative aspects about being a driver, and depending on your situation, you maybe shouldn't drive. But again, there's a lot of different things we have to talk about in this video, as at first, being a driver may seem like a very simple thing, like you just sign up and drive. And in some cases, it is pretty simple. But when we talk about these technicalities, there's a lot of things you really have to know before driving, especially in 2025. And so in this video, I'm going to break this down into 10 different points, 10 different parts about being a driver that you really have to know before you sign up. Number one, the current state of ride sharing. I want to start here with almost a current thing as we're in 2025 and as we're approaching it, because there's going to be a lot of things that I'm going to guess are going to happen in 2025. Now, in case you didn't know, the ride-sharing world has gotten very interesting over the past couple of years as the pandemic kind of slowed to a halt, and I feel like we're kind of out of it now. I don't want to jinx it, knock on wood, but COVID's pretty much over for the most part, and things are back to normal. That being said, I found from about 2020 to about 2022, 2023, it was almost the dark era of ride sharing. A lot of drivers were complaining about the pay and all these different things I'm going to talk about in this video, and things were pretty bad. Even in 2024, things weren't the best, and a lot of people have been complaining more than ever before about how bad it is to be a rideshare driver. That being said, I have seen and noticed that as 2024 is ending, 2025 is beginning, that things are picking back up. The pendulum is swinging the other direction. And I mean this in a very good way. Because I gotta be honest, in the past couple of years, when I've talked about should you be a driver or not, I found it was a bit more negative. It was a bit more pessimistic with the fact that there's a lot of things that were working against rideshare drivers. There were so many rideshare drivers complaining, the pay was really, really bad, they were being taken advantage of, and basically, if someone had to ask me point blank, should you or shouldn't you be a rideshare driver? In the past couple of years, I might lean more towards no. I mean, like, hey, with all the things going on, the legal issues, with different things happening with deactivation and pay and percentages, all these things I will be talking about in this video. If I had to pick one or the other, like black or white, I'd probably say no. Now, though, I say I'm leaning more towards yes. I feel like things are picking up and getting a lot better and a lot more positive. That being said, I always believe in being transparent, and I will be talking about the positives and the negatives in this video. So we'll be talking about everything. But in terms of the current state, what I'm finding is one, things are improving for rideshare drivers. Two, there's a lot more talk in different areas like Massachusetts, Minneapolis, or Minnesota, and California, and other places. There's a lot more talk of rights and protections happening for rideshare drivers. This is very important to understand on this video, that you can either be an employee or an independent contractor. That's kind of the worker classification status for any industry or any position. And ride sharing right now is kind of paving its way of being the first time, I think in history, to be almost independent contractors with benefits. And in the past couple of years, you were being treated, and rideshare drivers were being treated worse and worse. And I know this seems like I'm rambling a bit, but this is very important to understand that for the past couple of years, things were getting worse, and it almost kind of felt like there was no light at the end of the tunnel. It almost kind of felt like that rideshare drivers were being treated worse and worse without any indication that things were going to get better. It was kind of this situation of, all right, rideshare drivers are going to be treated pretty badly, and there's nothing they can do about it. Now, though, things are getting better, and this is changing a lot. And that's why I have a feeling that in 2025, I'm going to predict on this video as I'm filming it, things are going to pick up big time for rideshare drivers in a very positive way. And I want to state that as kind of like a current news, current situation of the ridesharing world to kick off this video, that if I had to lean towards picking one, like should you or shouldn't you, in the past couple of years, I'd probably say no, like I said. But now I'd probably say yes. Things are definitely looking better. That being said, there are some things that do work against you. So let's get into the next point of the big five. Let's talk about the big five. Now, there are 5 things I find that are working against you as a driver, especially in 2025, and 5 things that are working for you that are positives. Let's start with the positives, right? Let's start with the positives because I think this is important. One is that it's a flexible schedule. As we all know, Lyft and Uber is truly instantaneously flexible. You can start working whenever you want. You can stop working whenever you want, at no warning to Uber and Lyft. A lot of people sometimes still think in this day and age, as we're in 2025, that as a driver, you have to say like, hey, I'm working this Friday and Saturday night, for example. No, you turn it off whenever you want. You turn it on whenever you want. You can drive however many rides you want. It is truly the closest thing to being your own boss without being your own boss. This is why I think for 90% of people, this is their biggest reason why they sign up. The second one is instant cash outs. This is a big one that I find a lot of people don't know about. And the instant cash outs are pretty awesome. The fact that I can drive, like to make $100, I hit a button, and that money is instantly in my bank account. I'm not gonna lie, that's pretty insane. I can't think of any other industry that you instantly get that money right away the second, like say you go out and start working, and then you combine that with the flexible schedule. I mean, like say, and this has happened to me. I remember when I first started driving in Boston, like say I'm like, oh shoot, I need to pay a bill. I need $100. I need X amount for whatever. I'm like, okay, rather than try to figure out if I should charge it to my credit card or whatever, I could just go out, drive, cash out, boom, that money is right in my bank account. Third thing is there's no quota. I think this is also another big thing that I can like say for Uber, Lyft, for both apps. And by the way, huge pro tip, make sure you sign up with both apps. I'll be talking about that a little bit throughout this video. I will be giving you some pro tips, but I do want to make this video very relevant about driving in 2025. The third thing that still continues on is no quota. So I can actually do 100 rides in 1 week, not drive for 2 months, and then do 3 rides, right? There's no quota. And I think that's pretty awesome that, life happens. People's schedules are very different. And of course, there are some drivers who are full-time and they drive as much as they can. There are other drivers who are part-time. And there are other drivers who I might even say, not even part-time, but just when they want to or feel like it, for side cash, where they're like, hey, you know what? I haven't driven for the past few weeks, but I know it's my friend's birthday. I'm a little tight on money, so I'll go out and drive, make $100, and that will be my fun money, my spending money for my friend's birthday, for example. No quota is pretty awesome because a lot of jobs, even casual ones or easy ones, usually do require a quota. In case you didn't know, for YouTube, for example, a fun fact, if you don't post on your YouTube channel for 6 months, YouTube removes you from the YouTube Partner Program. You get demonetized. You lose out on that money if you don't post for 6 months, right? Lyft and Uber, you could not drive for 7 months, instantly start driving again and making money. That's how awesome it is. Number 4, and this is a big one that I think a lot of people overlook, especially when I'm with point 5, which I'll talk about, is the low barrier to entry. So let me get to the next point and then jump back a little bit. Number 5 for the big 5 of positive aspects, it's a decent pay. A lot of people want to know, how much does the average driver make? I'd say about 20 to 25 an hour. Now, granted, some places pay more, some places pay less. Your location is the number one factor that determines how much money you can make as a driver. It's kind of unfortunate that, as you can imagine, if you're in a hot spot like New York, San Diego, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Boston, these places can pay a good amount per hour. However, that being said, if let's say you're in a remote part of Ohio, for example, or a remote part of Iowa, you might not get that much money. And this is why I said right in the intro, depending on your situation, with a lot of different factors we're going to be talking about in this video, in some cases you should, in some cases you shouldn't. If you're in a very remote area, maybe you shouldn't drive and do something else instead. Right, so number 5 needs to pay. And jumping back to number 4, low barrier to entry. What I mean is, for most people, you have a driver's license. And in case you didn't know, even if you don't have a car, and I will be talking about this, you could still rent one through Uber and Lyft. I'd say you're looking at about spending in 2025 about $200 to $300 a week to rent that vehicle. So let's say if you're in a position where you're like, hey, like I need a job. It's kind of that paradox. I need a job to make money to buy a car, but then you needed a car to get to the job to make money. It's kind of that paradox where you can just drive for Uber and Lyft and rent a car through them. But for most people, they at least have a driver's license. It's a pretty low barrier to entry. And I've used this example in a couple of other videos that I used to be an accountant. And I remember, even now I see sometimes some jobs are like, hey, you need a bachelor's degree in accounting. You need a bachelor's degree in accounting. You need one. In order to do this job, we're paying you $22.50 an hour. And I'm like, okay, I can either do 4 years of schooling, rigorous schooling, studying. I mean, I studied on average like 40 hours for every exam. I mean, accounting was brutal. Spend all this money, as you can imagine, student debt, student loans, that kind of thing, and get that accounting degree after 4 years of grueling work, finances, etc., to make $22.50. Or I just sign up as a driver in a second and make close to that. If anything, significantly more. Now, of course, there are different pros and cons on both sides if you look at accounting versus Uber and Lyft. But the low barrier to entry, I think, is a very underrated thing that if you can make $20 to $25 an hour doing that flexible time, like I said, doing that whenever you want to drive, you have a flexible schedule to make $20 to $25 an hour with a low barrier to entry, meaning you don't have to have a college degree, whatever, you just start driving. The fact that you can instantly cash it out, you don't even have a quota. So if you want to go out and make $25, that's it. If you want to go out and make $225, you could do that, right? So the fact of the big five that I really like, to say them again, flexible schedule, instant cash outs, I have these written down as you can imagine, no quota, low barrier to entry, and of course, decent pay, $20 to $25 an hour, makes Lyft and Uber, I'm going to be honest, a pretty good, I find, secondary job. For me personally, I might as well say as a side note, I did not like Lyft and Uber full-time. I preferred it and loved it part-time. It was great part-time. I think probably one of the best part-time jobs. That being said, there's a lot of benefits to Lyft and Uber. There's a lot of reasons why you should drive. These big five that I talked about. Let's now talk about the other big five on the negative end. On the yin and yang of positives versus negatives being a rideshare driver. First off is pay. Now, I know it seems weird. Like, wait a minute. You just said $20 to $25 an hour. What do you mean now pay? Now, here's where things get very, very annoying. One, pay. The fact of the matter is, and this is like a double-edged sword, not only has pay gotten less and less for drivers, but inflation has increased. This is part of the economy, right? And inflation has increased. And back when I first started driving in Boston, this is in 2014, 2015. So basically 10 years ago, almost 11 years ago, actually, when I first started driving in Boston, people would ask me, hey, how much do you make on average as a driver? I'd say, $20 to $25 an hour. Now, back in 2014, 2015, that was a good amount. A decade later, though, that $20 to $25 an hour still exists and just doesn't hit the same. Let's be honest. It doesn't hit the same, right? No, granted, don't get me wrong. Like I mentioned with the accounting example on the positive end, yeah, I mean, there are still accounting jobs that have that you need a college degree and blah, 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 blah. So there is something to be said about that, but even still, it's like $20 to $25 an hour doesn't hit the same. Now, there are areas and times that you can make the most amount of money. This is kind of Lyft and Uber 101, being a rideshare driver 101, but morning and evening commutes, so 7 to 9 a.m., 5 to 7 p.m., and Friday and Saturday nights, I'd say probably 7, 8, 9 p.m. till 3 a.m. is probably the peak for Friday and Saturday nights. That's when you can make more money. That's when it's surging, and that means you're going to make more money, as we probably all know this. So on average, if it's surging, depending on the area, you could probably look at $30-ish an hour. So not bad, but here's the thing. The pay's gotten worse with Uber and Lyft. This has been the biggest complaint from all rideshare drivers, that pay's gotten worse. And if anything, not only has it gotten worse, but because inflation's increased, it's almost this double whammy of, wait a minute, I used to make $25 an hour. Now I'm making $20 an hour. And that $20 an hour does not go and hit the way it used to. It doesn't go as far as it used to when it comes to groceries, bills, spending money, just living in general, making ends meet. That gets a little frustrating. And that's a big thing a lot of drivers care about, as you can imagine, because you're driving to make money. You're probably not watching this video for fun. You're watching it because you want to make money. And that's been an unfortunate thing. The second big one, and this is one that is kind of annoying, is that expenses have gotten worse. This is another thing that kind of combines with the inflation, that gas is more expensive. At least right now, the exact time that I'm filming this video, it seems like gas has gotten a little better, but I don't know, right? But maintenance on your car, oil changes, replacing your tires, replacing your brakes. This is another big thing. It's kind of annoying that basically you have to spend money in order to make money. Not the case with other jobs. And I will be talking about that a bit later in this video. But with Uber and Lyft, there's a direct correlation that you have to spend money to make money. You have to constantly be putting gas in your car. You have to constantly be maintaining that vehicle. And with the pay being lower, and then, like I said, not just with inflation, but now inflation directly regarding the maintenance on your car, that second negative point really does work against you. Third thing on this huge big five of the negative aspects is the fact of deactivations. Now, this is one that I've talked about more and more over time because it's gotten more common. Now, things are getting a little better in 2025. Uber and Lyft is now starting to put in policies, but let's say you get a bad driver and a bad passenger, and let's say they complain, they make something up, your account could be deactivated, which means let's say you're relying on Uber and Lyft, and let's say you are, driving full time, and all of a sudden you wake up, and because you and a passenger got in a dispute, and they made up something, they said, "Oh, my driver was drunk," and you're like, "I wasn't drunk," but Lyft and Uber deactivates your account, meaning you can't drive, you can't make money because they want to investigate. And I see both sides of this, because there are drivers who have been caught driving drunk. But this is how you get affected. Deactivations have gotten way worse. And I feel like in 2024 is like the year of deactivations. I think it was never worse ever. The term deactivation wasn't even talked about even a few years ago. And then for some reason, I feel like in 2023 to 2024, maybe even 2022 a little bit, it became like the era of deactivations with Uber and Lyft. It was super annoying, super frustrating because, hate to say it, as I guess maybe a bonus negative point, Uber and Lyft tends to favor or focus on the passenger's point and their side more than the driver's. They tend to favor the passenger more than the driver, which is very unfortunate. Although that is changing. Like I said, there is policies being put into place, but this is something to be aware of. And I have had some drivers comment, and it makes sense, on this channel saying, "Hey, Mark, I'm not going to lie. I got deactivated. I couldn't drive for a week. I couldn't make money for a week. And now I'm reactivated. I can drive, but now I'm worried. When's going to be the next time?" This constant anxiety in the back of my head of, okay, when is Uber or Lyft going to do this again? Again, this is why I also should suggest sign up with both apps. Just do that in case, God forbid, something happens on one app, you have the other one. But this is a big thing to keep in mind. The deactivations are a real thing. They're getting a little better, but that is unfortunate, especially if you're relying on this income. Fourth big five thing that works against you is a percentage. This is one that goes hand in hand with the pay. Not just with inflation and deactivation and all that kind of stuff. It's the fact that Lyft and Uber is now taking out a bigger cut. So like I said, back in the day, about 10 years ago when I first started driving, you would make between 20 and 25 an hour, and Lyft and Uber would take out exactly a 20% cut. So if I made, $100, I would get 80, they would get 20. To me, I thought that was very fair. I mean, they made the apps, they find the people, I just hit the button, I just kind of follow the instructions. It's pretty simple to be a driver, I'll be honest, for the most part. 20%, 80%. That worked for me. Now it is off the charts. Now I've heard of some drivers even saying they take close to 50%. So not only is some of the pay getting lower, there are some drivers who told me, like, yeah, I used to make 25 an hour, now I make 20. So not only is the pay lower, but also inflation's a bit of an issue where now you have to spend more money, and also that 20 to 25 an hour, not even mentioning, the maintenance on your car, but just general living doesn't hit the same. And now on top of that, you have to worry about deactivation. And then on top of that, you now have to worry about the fact, Lyft and Uber, they might take out a bigger cut. So let's say if you made, I'm making this up, right, to make numbers similar. Let's say you used to make 25 an hour before, and Lyft and Uber used to take out 20%. Okay, now you might make 20 an hour, and Uber and Lyft is taking out 50%. It's like, wait, I'm making less money, and they're taking more money away from me. Like, this is not good. And this is why the biggest complaint of drivers is the pay. That things are just not hitting the same. There's no other way to word that. Things are just not hitting the same. And then lastly, number 5, with all these 4 things being considered, and that is too many drivers being on the road. Now, there are statistics to show. I want to mention this because sometimes it does get brought up by Uber and Lyft as kind of like a false argument, or this is probably a better argument, or is it the straw man argument? I can't remember what the term is, but they say, hey, well, drivers can't complain. There's more passengers using Ubers and Lyfts every day. This is true. This is actually true. Uber and Lyft, every day, if you look at the statistics and everything, there are more rides being taken every day. More and more people are signing up for the apps every day. Lyft and Uber is continuing to expand as well. Like Lyft right now, these are the time of this video, in 2025 is in the United States and Canada. Uber is pretty much worldwide. Who knows if Lyft will continue to expand to other countries, but Uber's expanding a lot. Lyft is as well. Things are getting bigger, but here's the thing. If you look at the rate and the growth of how many people are signing up to order Ubers and Lyfts, passengers basically, versus how many new drivers sign up, there is way more drivers signing up and way less passengers signing up if you have to look at that statistic and correlation. And the issue of this, and this has been a big thing in 2024, and I think it might get worse in 2025. I'm kind of curious to see how this kind of plays out, but I can see this being, if anything, one of the biggest issues on top of everything I've talked about in terms of the negatives, is with too many drivers being on the road, there's less passenger rides to go around. There's less rides in general. There's less work to go around. And although you can sign up and drive whenever you want, it's a truly flexible schedule. I have had some drivers tell me like, yeah, Mark, I'm not going to lie. This whole too many drivers being on the road thing is such an issue that before I used to go out, I have rides nonstop. In case you didn't know, when it comes to Uber and Lyft, back in the day, it was very binary. So you drive, drop somebody off, wait a second, you get a new ride. Now, Uber and Lyft, which is smart, does what's called an overlapping technique, where before you get done with the ride, you accept another one. So you constantly have another ride kind of in queue, or you have multiple sometimes in queue if you want. However, that being said, I've had some drivers be like, yeah, there's so many drivers on the road. I used to be overlapping like crazy. It would be nonstop rides. Now I get a couple an hour. I don't know. Now it's just not the way it used to be. And as you can imagine, if you're already not making that much money, you're really hoping to get these rides. You're like, I need these rides. I'm already not making that much money. Uber and Lyft's already taking out a huge percentage. Deactivation's an issue. Maintenance on my car is more expensive. Inflation's an issue, blah, 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 blah. And now on top of this, I can't even get work. I can't even pick people up. And of course, this does depend area to area. Like I feel like if I had to guess, this is a way bigger issue, as you can probably imagine, in remote areas than a place like LA or San Francisco, where things are going to be pretty much nonstop. But the fact of the matter is, I think with the way things have been going in the economy, a lot of people are getting second jobs. And a lot of people say, hey, what's the easiest second job to get? Being a driver. And this is both good and bad. Like I said, there's a lot of benefits about being a driver and a lot of reasons why you should drive with all these benefits I've laid out. But there's also a lot of negative aspects. And there's also a tremendous amount of reasons, I hate to say it, why you shouldn't drive, like I just mentioned. And then when you combine all those negatives with the last point on this big five of there being too many drivers on the road, not only is it just not a good economical status to be a driver, you combine that with just not even getting work at all. A lot of drivers are saying, hey, you know what? Maybe I shouldn't drive. It might just not be worth it. Number 3, the hourly rate. Now, there's a lot more to this than you could expect. Now, I did mention briefly in the past point, the average driver right now in 2025 makes about $20 to $25 an hour. But there's more that goes into this. And this is a big thing, I think, if anything, for most drivers. If you want to ask me what's the biggest point, most important point on this entire video, this is probably it. 1, because you probably want to get paid, and you want to get paid well. You want to know, just in general, if it's worth it, right? So 1, you want to know about the pay, but 2, there are more factors that go into the pay that you probably would expect and know about. And this, to me, is the holy grail, the most important thing on this video of should you drive or shouldn't, at least in my opinion, because if I was going to be driving and I was considering signing up and driving, I'd want to know, is it worth it? Because some people I know, I've met some drivers who just drive for fun. They do it because they're retired. They're like, hey, I also know some drivers who, like, say, are like, yeah, I'm against drunk driving. So by driving for Uber and Lyft, I feel like I'm helping people out. So I get that too. But for most people, they're like, I want to drive to make money. And I think on top of that, is it worth it? The ROI, is the return on my investment, is me going out and driving going to make the money, and the hours that I put in as a driver is going to be worth it? Now, first off, like I said, 20 to 25 an hour on average. This does fluctuate. In some places, it's a lot higher. Vegas, LA, San Francisco, San Diego, these places can pay a lot. Other places like rural areas and smaller areas, not as much. So this is something you definitely want to weigh out. Another thing, of course, is expense. Now, I did talk about that in the past point. I mean, maintenance on your car, gas, etc. It is unfortunate that you do have to spend money to make money, right? And that's a very big thing to keep in mind that I will be kind of threading through this video a little bit at different points, is in some cases, you might be better off just finding a different job. And yeah, don't get me wrong, Uber and Lyft with a low barrier to entry is a positive point. You can make, depending on the situation, a good amount of money. The fact that it's something you could just do anytime and it's flexible. But sometimes I got to be honest. And again, I like to show both sides on my videos and be very transparent. In some cases, and sometimes you might just be like, you know what? It's just not worth it. It's really not worth it. So I want to say that. Expenses, of course, are more expensive. In general, maintenance on your car, gas, et cetera, et cetera. Next thing is your car situation. I will be talking about that in a bit. But as you can imagine, if you're driving, let's say, a Ford F-150 that has a low MPG, your ROI at the end of the day, after gas and all that kind of stuff, might not be there. It might not be that good. Another thing might be renting. So this is something that I will talk about in the next couple points. But when you rent, like I said, you're going to spend on average about $200 to $300 a week to rent a car to drive. Now, in some cases, that might be worth it. In some cases, it might not be. And also remember, you can rent if you already have your vehicle. And I will be talking about this a bit more in detail, but this does affect your bottom line because if, let's say, I go out and let's say I make $20 an hour, I have to drive 10 hours in a week just to break even, right? Even if I'm making 20 an hour. And it comes down to this math, right? Where let's say if I go out and I make $300, and on average, I'm like, oh, I do the math out. I'm like, oh, I made 20 an hour and I drove, I don't know, let's say I made 30 an hour. Let's just say, to use simple math, let's say I made like 30 an hour, $30 an hour. I drove 10 hours. I made $300. I'm like, yeah, I made 30 an hour. It's like, no, you didn't, because you had to make $200 just to break even. So technically, you really only made $100 in 10 hours. And when you do the math out, you really made $10 an hour. So renting a vehicle, although maybe the best option for a lot of people, might really affect it. And you might say, wait a minute, okay, you're right. After the limited amount that I can drive and renting, I don't know if it's worth it. Another thing is your location. Now, like I said, your location is the number one factor that determines how much money you can make. It is tough to say. And I know there's nothing more annoying than an ambiguous YouTube statement. So I apologize about this, but it does depend on your area. And I do suggest, even more annoyingly, I know I apologize, you might have to Google it. Because on this video, I could spend hours talking about every county or area or state or whatever, but it does fluctuate a lot. And there are new reports coming out all the time, which is great, about how much money you can make. There's even new reports saying, hey, in this one area, Uber pays more than Lyft, Lyft pays more than Amazon if you want to be an Amazon driver, and Amazon pays more than Uber Eats or DoorDash if you want to be a delivery driver. There's some reports, I think it was Gridwise, I believe, that did it where they ranked it for like every city or something like that. And that's a big thing to look at, is maybe for your area, Google average hourly rate in your area. In some cases, it may be worth it. In some cases, it may not be. And I know for a lot of people, this is a big one they want to know. And then last thing when it comes to the hourly rate, this is another big one about should you drive or shouldn't you drive, is how and when. Because if, let's say, someone came and he said, hey, Mark, I have kind of an odd schedule. I'm a bartender and I work, and I'm making something up, Monday through Thursday, 9 p.m. to 3 a.m. Monday through Thursday. I'd say, you know what? Being a driver is a good idea because you can work the morning, evening commutes, 7 to 9 a.m., 5 to 7 p.m. You obviously want to be careful with sleep, of course, be safe. And then Friday and Saturday nights, you have open, which I feel like for most bartenders is probably the opposite. But, so these are things to keep in mind, that depending on how and when you can work has a huge factor. If, let's say, someone came and said, hey, Mark, I'm not going to lie, I'm kind of busy, but I can drive Monday through Thursday, 1 p.m. to like 6 p.m. That's the only time I can drive. I might say, hey, even if you're in a good area, even if, like, say, the hourly rate on average is good and all this kind of stuff, even if, like, say, you have a good vehicle, like a Prius, I think it's got like a good vehicle to drive, it might just not be worth it. Because how and when you can drive is just not the most optimal time. Now, there are different factors to determine the most amount of money you can make when it comes to Uber and Lyft. One, I'd say, is events. So events sometimes can have the best surges. If, like, say, there's a Taylor Swift concert, if, like, say, there's a baseball game, if, like, say, there's, I don't know, an EDM festival, if there are these events, you're going to make a ton of money. Another thing to focus on is the peak hours, like I already mentioned a couple times. Third thing is bonuses. This is another big one. This is why I also suggest to sign up with both Uber and Lyft, because the bonuses can be insane. I know some drivers, I remember talking to some in Denver, Colorado, just to pick one city an example, and I have interviewed drivers all around the country, both online and offline, which is kind of cool. It's kind of cool to see the interesting perspectives of Uber and Lyft and the different finances and economics of Uber and Lyft around the country. In Denver, Colorado, for example, I found the average was kind of odd. I got $20 to $40 an hour on average for Uber and Lyft in Denver. And I remember being like, wait, okay, that's a pretty big spread. That's a double, right? And what I realized is the drivers who made about $20 to $25 an hour never focus on the bonuses. They're just like, oh yeah, I just drive. That's it. But then the drivers who made about 30 to 40 an hour, I noticed, or 25 to 40 an hour, depending on the situation, were like, yeah, I focus on the bonuses. Here are my hacks. Here are my tricks. Here are my tips to optimize the bonus and get those incentives and everything. And I noticed that the drivers who put a lot of effort into the strategic analysis of when and how they should drive, and it sounds a bit weird, those are the ones that made the most amount of money. Now, I will say, I've done a lot of videos about how to make more money. I have a video listed below in the description of 25 tips for new drivers, how to optimize your income and make more money. I definitely suggest watching that video after this one, if let's say you are planning on driving. With all that being said, when it comes to the hourly rate, there are a lot of factors that, although at first, 20 to 25 an hour is the average, there are a lot of factors that determine overall. And I think the biggest one, to be honest, is how and when you can drive, given your location. And obviously your location you don't really have control over unless you're planning on moving. But there's all these different things you need to keep in mind, because being honest, maybe at first it looks great given your area. Maybe actually, when you actually look into all the nitty-gritty stuff based off your schedule and whatever, maybe it's not worth it, or vice versa. It really depends on your situation, and that's why I'm giving you all these different things you need to know, because in some cases you should drive with this great hourly rate and your location, all this kind of stuff. But in other cases, maybe you shouldn't. If actually you just can't drive during the good times, if you're not in a good location, and so much more. Number 4, the car situation. Now, I'm going to start off here with a bit of an unfortunate point. There are new requirements as we go into 2025, not just with the car, but with you. So let's talk about the logistics now of being a driver, of what you have to have in general to drive, especially including the car. First off, you need like a driver's license. They're gonna be running a background check, both a background check as a criminal one. So do you have any things on your record, what we typically think of a background check, but also a driving background check. So when it comes to this question, should you drive or shouldn't you drive? If let's say you have 10 speeding tickets on your record, there's a chance they're going to be like, maybe not. They will be reviewing your driving record. Now, they don't really say exactly with Uber and Lyft. They don't really say exactly like, hey, if you have 3 speeding tickets, you're okay, but if you have 4, you can't drive. They don't really have that, but keep in mind, there will be a team of people looking at your account, just kind of reviewing it and everything, so keep that in mind. Another thing, which I got to be honest, I disagree with on this, like, I don't know, age. Now, before, with Uber and Lyft was typically 25 years or older and up. That's typically the way Lyft's been in recent years is you have to be 25 or older to drive. Uber used to be 21 years or older to drive. I feel like 21 and up makes sense. I don't know why Lyft is at 25. It's kind of annoying. That being said, Uber has now followed suit with Lyft. Now, both apps in 2025 require you to be 25 years or older, which already, if you're watching this video and let's say you're in college or whatever, you might be like, wait a minute. Wait, what? What do you mean I have to be 25? I'm 22 and I'm doing classes and I want to drive for Uber and Lyft between classes, which is a great idea. You want to make side cash or beer money or whatever, right? Of course, drink responsibly and everything. But that's unfortunate and also really annoying. I think 21 and older, just a side note, I think makes a lot of sense. Like I get 18 and older. Okay, maybe they're like, all right, 18's too young. But by 21, I don't know. Bit of a subject for a different video, but that is unfortunate with these new requirements. You have to be 25 and up for both apps. Keep that in mind. Now, there are other options, and I will be talking about them a bit later in this video, if actually you are under 25 in terms of age. But these new requirements are kind of annoying. In addition, one last thing, and this is not necessarily a requirement, but something to keep in mind is if you are actually using your own vehicle, and there's going to be 2 types of people watching this video right now. You either have your own vehicle or not, and you're looking to rent. Or I guess as a third category, you have a vehicle but doesn't qualify. For example, you can have a 4-door vehicle to drive, of course, but if you have a 2-door vehicle, you can not drive for Uber and Lyft. There are some nitty-gritty car requirements. They're not that strict, but sometimes they can kind of wean people out. Like one of my friends, for example, did have a 2-door vehicle, and he's like, shoot, I wanted to drive, but I couldn't. Now I have to do Uber Eats, which pros and cons, and I will be talking about delivery driving a bit later in this video, because I feel like there are some pros and cons if you look at like rideshare driving versus delivery driving, but again, we'll get there. For this point though, again, want to kind of stress those points that if like you are using your own vehicle, you do have to have a driver's license, a mostly clean record, both criminally and also your driving record, and also be 25 and up. Again, I know a bit unfortunate, like I said, if you are under 25. Now, when it comes to your vehicle, you do have to get inspected once a year. first off, you have to get inspected. Actually, it's just with Lyft. It's kind of interesting how they do this. Lyft requires you to do this Zoom call with them now. They did not used to do this. Now they do. That when you sign up, you have to, it's almost like a riddle. You have to have like a penny, a friend with you, like good cell phone service, all this. You need all these different items, and you basically do a Zoom call with somebody. Think of it almost like a virtual interview where you show them your car, you walk around. You may need a friend, or I guess you could use a tripod to test the brake lights. They do all these different things, and then in addition, once a year, you do need to get your car inspected once a year, and that can go for both Uber and Lyft. So let's say if I go to a dealership or a mechanic or whatever, and I say, hey, got to do an Uber inspection. I'm an Uber driver. They inspect my car. They give me a form of like everything passing. I can submit that to Uber to continue driving or to start driving. I can also submit that to Lyft. So I can submit the form to the other company. They don't really get weird. I was kind of worried about that. Like, hey, this form says Uber. Is Lyft going to get mad that they know I'm driving for Uber? Lyft and Uber, being honest, assume that you are driving for the other app, or they just know about it. They don't really, I'm going to be honest, they don't really care as much. So I know some drivers do ask me that when it comes to signing with both apps or driving for both apps, especially at the same time, which a lot of drivers do to make the most amount of money. Just want to say that. Now, when it comes to the car situation though, like I said, like you're using your own vehicle, things are kind of what you would expect. Like I mentioned throughout this video, in terms of the requirements and all that kind of stuff, what you would expect, the only big thing I'd say there are two to keep in mind, which are kind of hand in hand but kind of different when it comes to using your own vehicle, is one, you're going to put a lot of wear and tear. Like if you're, like say your car, has 50,000 miles on it, the more that you drive, the more that your car depreciates in value over time. You also have to replace a lot of things in your car. I know some people who drove for Lyft and said like, yeah, I did only 3 months of driving for Lyft. I was driving a good amount. I had to replace my brakes a year, 2 years sooner than I would expect, and I'd spend all this money for brakes. And as you can imagine, again, all that wear and tear on your car does add up. Not to mention you have to put in gas. Like I said, you have to spend money to make money. Your tires, just in general. And one big thing is the value. The value of your car, getting to the second point now, does go down. So let's say, looking way ahead, if let's say you drive for a year and you put in thousands of miles on your car and you go to sell it, your car is now be worth less because you drove for Lyft and Uber. And I think this is a big thing a lot of drivers don't think about, that at first you're like, oh, I'm going to drive, I'm making good money, all this kind of stuff. But it can kind of bite you in the butt years down the road. Now, depends on how much you drive. Of course, it does depend. There's a lot of variables to this, but it's something to keep in mind. Another point is dealerships. So in case you didn't know, dealerships now ask you, when it comes to Uber and Lyft, when it comes to your vehicle, is how's your car? There's a checklist typically when you sell in a car or give a car into a dealership in terms of the amount. And they ask you like, has this car ever been involved in an accident, et cetera, et cetera? And one of the top questions they ask you right away is, has this car ever been used for a rideshare or taxi-like service such as Uber and Lyft? And unfortunately, they might give you less money, and understandably so, because you're like, okay, well, this car is being used, there's a bunch of miles on it, there's a bunch of stuff going on and everything. As a result of all that happening, we're actually going to give you less money for your car. And it's kind of unfortunate. Let's say if you drove for a year, and you're like, yeah, you know what? I drove for a year. I made good money, but this is just not for me. Which, again, some people like Lyft and Uber. Some people don't. Some people it does work with their schedule. Some people it doesn't. It's kind of unfortunate that, you drove for a year. You didn't do anything with Lyft and Uber for 5 years. You go to sell them in your car, and you're like, yeah, I want to be honest. Like, yeah, I did drive for Lyft and Uber, but only for a little bit. They're like, oh, but you did, though. You did drive, and you drove 10,000 miles. Well, now your car is worth less because it's 10,000 miles more in your car that wouldn't exist because of Uber and Lyft. And now we're also saying that your car was used as a rideshare or taxi-like vehicle. You're going to get less for your car overall. This is what's kind of annoying, I'm not going to lie, about the car situation using your own vehicle. Now, on the other end, you have, of course, renting a vehicle. And when it comes to renting a vehicle, like I said, it's about $200 to $300 a week. Already mentioned that a couple times. But like I used with that math example, your hourly rate really shrinks. Like I said, to use quick math, if let's say you're making $30 an hour, let's say you only drive during the peak hours. You drive, you're making $30 an hour, you drive for 10 hours, you're like, oh, wow, I made $30 an hour because I drove for 10 hours. But no, you didn't. You spent $200 to rent that vehicle for that week. You really only made $100, which means you do 10 hours with 100, you really only made $10 an hour. Now, of course, you can, drive as much as you want, typically with most terms. I do suggest if you're renting a vehicle, look at the fine print and the terms. Definitely do that because in some situations, it may be more worth it or less. Most of the time, they don't have a cap, but I've seen some times where they say, you can only do I don't know, 100 miles a week. I don't know. I'm just making numbers up. And you're like, wait a minute. Oh, so now I have to spend all this money for this car, but wait, but now I have to worry about how much I'm driving? Like I'm capped? Like, so most of them do have unlimited miles. There are some perks, but keep in mind when it comes to renting, I feel like, just being blunt, you kind of have to do a lot, right? Because I mean, if you're already spending $200, you could potentially lose money. Like, say you make $190 in a week and you're like, oh, cool, I made 190. It's like, no, you technically made negative 10 or you lost 10. I think is a better way to word that. So this is where things can get very, very unfortunate when it comes to your car situation. Now, one last thing I do want to mention when it comes to the car situation, especially with renting, is Teslas. This is a massive curveball that's gotten more popular. I've already done a few videos about driving a Tesla and renting one because I've talked to a lot of drivers who are like, yeah, you know, I was using my own vehicle. And like I said, you can use your own vehicle if you want, but you can also have your own vehicle and also rent one. You know, like I said, there was one time, for example, I remember one of my friends back in Boston, she was driving pretty much full time and she had her own vehicle. And she said, hey, Mark, I'm driving so much that I'd actually rather rent a vehicle and spend $200 a week or $800 a month because I don't get all that wear and tear on my car. And like I said as well, there's a lot of negative aspects about using your own vehicle, the value, the depreciation, et cetera, et cetera. If you want to sell it into a dealership, blah, 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 blah. So that makes sense for her, right? So I want to say that. That being said, there are some drivers who say, hey, you know what? I am driving with my own car and I'm making good money, but I'm actually going to not drive with my own car. And instead of just renting any car, I'm going to rent a Tesla. There's been a lot of reports to show, and I think this does depend, I feel like, a lot in your location. Like LA is, I think, a prime example of this, where Teslas have been shown in a lot of studies, if you are being a rideshare driver, you're driving for Uber and Lyft, you can make significantly a lot more money driving a Tesla than any other vehicle. And I found for a couple of reasons. One is that Teslas can do premium ride types. Now, in case you didn't know, taking a quick side note, when it comes to Uber and Lyft, most of you probably know this, but in case you don't, you have Uber and Lyft as the normal rides. But then you have XL rides, which means you have a bigger vehicle, you can fit more people, and you make more money. But then on top of that, you have more premium options. You have like Uber Black and Lyft Black, Uber Lux and Lyft Lux. And these are rides that can pay a lot of money because they're considered luxury rides, black car rides. Another one is Uber Comfort, for example, or Comfort rides, where they're kind of in between that you make, more money because it's considered a more comfortable vehicle. The passenger can control the temperature and all this kind of stuff. And when it comes to a Tesla, Teslas usually do qualify for these more premium ride types. So it gets you more money. The second thing is usually I've heard from a lot of people, lower maintenance, in the sense that charging it and stuff like that is a lot cheaper than gas. And maintenance on the Tesla, you don't have to worry about. Even though you're renting it, the expenses, gas basically, is a lot easier. And then three, and this is the big one, is tips. Now, I'm not even mentioning tips at all in this video yet. But when it comes to tips, bringing it up now, it could be a whole thing for a video. And I've talked a lot in other videos. I feel like tipping when it comes to ride sharing is very unfortunate. In case you've never been a rideshare driver before, I find rideshare driving is the least tipped profession that should be getting tips out of anything, period. Rideshare drivers do not get any tips, and it is incredibly annoying, incredibly unfortunate. I've done videos about this, so I'm not going to go into detail, but I just want to say be prepared that if you are driving, tips are very uncommon. I mean, they're getting better. I think it's getting better, and I think the reason why, to briefly sum this up, I think is one, a lot of people just don't even still know that you can tip, or maybe they don't see it. Maybe it's the GUI or the graphical user interface of the app. But two, there's not that social pressure. You know, if you go to a bar and you put 0 as a tip, you're going to get some sugar honey iced tea. You're going to get some stuff. The bartender's going to be pissed. Same thing at a restaurant. Same thing anywhere else. But with a rideshare, with an Uber or Lyft, once that passenger leaves and the driver drives away, if they don't tip, it's not like there's any, hate to say it, social pressure or repercussions. They can just continue on. But anyway, going to tips now, though, with the Tesla. In a positive light, that's more of a negative point, but on a positive light, people have reported that they make way more money from tips. So overall, when it comes to the car situation, talking now about renting and specifically Teslas, I have had a lot of people say that they make significantly more money renting a Tesla, even though they might be spending. I heard one driver saying they were spending even $400 a week, like almost double of what they spend on a normal rental vehicle. And they're like, yeah, I'm spending pretty much like $1,600 a month to rent a Tesla. But yeah, it's $1,600. That's a good amount of money. That's a good amount of money to rent for a month, but it's well worth it because I'm making so much money. I'm making so much more from the Tesla that is 100% worth it. And it really comes down to this. If you are planning on renting a vehicle or considering it, right? Because if you think about it, that is the lowest barrier to entry. If you already have a driver's license, getting a car might be tricky. Or having a car might not be financially possible for you. Renting a car is definitely possible. But one thing I will say is you can probably imagine, big cop novice here, but I want to mention is if you are going to rent a car, be prepared that in order to make it worth your while, to have a good ROI, or return on your investment, you kind of do have to drive full time and you have to drive a lot. Number 5, legal stuff. I know it's a bit of a ambiguous phrasing, like legal stuff, but I have to mention this, that as you can imagine, the more that you're on the road, the more likely you are to get into an accident. I know not the happiest thing, not the best thing, not the most positive thing to hear on a video, but I do have to mention it. Secondly, with legal stuff, the more likely that you're driving, the more that you drive, the more likely you are to potentially get into a dispute with a passenger, right? And we've probably all seen these news reports and stories of, let's say, drivers being attacked by passengers or something happening. Now, I will say, if you look at these statistics, the chance of something like that happening is mind-blowingly rare. I do want to say that. Although sometimes, like, you see all these news articles constantly happening about this happened or that happened, they're pretty rare. So I will say that if you look at the statistics, but they do happen. This is why I will say as a side note, Uber and Lyft does have a lot of safety procedures on the apps. If, let's say, you want someone to track your location, like a family or friend, if, let's say, you need to call 911, God forbid, and I know I'm getting into a bit of a Murphy's Law right now, but I do have to mention it. I do have to mention it on this video, right? And one thing I want to say is when it comes to the legal stuff, there are a couple things I just have to suggest for every driver. Now, one, make sure you have auto insurance. It still shocks me that some people don't even have auto insurance at all. Just have auto insurance in general, even if you're not driving. If, like, say you're watching this for fun or whatever, just get auto insurance. But 2, get rideshare insurance. This is a big thing. I know some drivers kind of overlook. They're like, oh, I don't need rideshare insurance. I'll be fine. Very famous last words to say, I'll be fine. Make sure you get rideshare insurance. The reason why is the last thing that have happen is, let's say you're driving and you get into an accident. You call your insurance. You're like, yeah, I was driving for Uber and Lyft and this happened. You're like, wait. You were driving for Uber and Lyft? You didn't tell us that. This is news to us. You know what? We're not going to cover you. And I hate to say it, probably not surprising. Insurance companies will use any excuse they can to not cover you. And so when it comes to Uber and Lyft, 1, make sure you tell your insurance in general, not just having auto insurance, but tell them. But 2, get rideshare insurance. Now, there's going to be 2 situations. One is either A, they will have their insurance where they're like, all right, you can bundle it together, where you have rideshare insurance and auto insurance. Or B, you may have to go to another insurance company and have like 2 different insurances, auto insurance and then rideshare insurance. Make sure you have this, because I'm telling you, I've had people comment on this channel saying, hey, Mark, I did not have rideshare insurance. My insurance did not cover me, and I'm in the hole deep because of an accident. Or vice versa. I've had people say, hey, you know what? I listened to you. I decided to get rideshare insurance. It was an extra $10 a month. I figured, why not? I got into an accident. Something happened, and my insurance didn't really want to cover me, but my rideshare insurance did. Or the rideshare insurance policy on my auto insurance was able to cover that. Thank God I got rideshare insurance. Just got it. I'll also say as a side note, AAA isn't a bad thing. I know not necessarily a legal thing, but if your car breaks down or whatever, AAA is awesome. I'm a huge fan of AAA. By the way, no affiliation. I also might as well say I have no affiliation with Uber or Lyft, which I think is pretty obvious because I'm talking pretty bad about them in some cases on this video, but I might as well mention that. I'm just being honest and very transparent. AAA is also very helpful. Another thing I always say to a lot of drivers is a dash cam. Now, there are some things I will say as a quick side note that you don't necessarily need in your car, but you kind of need. I usually suggest phone mount to mount your phone because most people use your phone, of course, for Uber and Lyft. You need a phone and also the GPS. An aux cord or some way for people to connect to your car. I know Bluetooth exists, but I feel like an aux cord is a bit easier. Sometimes napkins isn't a bad idea. Phone charger is a big one because, as you can imagine, if, let's say, you're using your phone, using Uber and Lyft and Google Maps and Pandora or Spotify to play music, phone charger is vital. I also suggest maybe getting like one of those ports that goes in your car, and you can have 2. One that's always charging your phone. You never unplug it. And then a long one you can kind of pass back when someone gets in your car. And you can have some that are like multi-split. So that's like the iPhone, USB-C, micro USB, all these different kind of ports that way. Although I think the iPhones now have USB-C. But anyway, basically it's a multi-port one depending on the person's phone. And then lastly, the big thing I suggest to every driver, have a dash cam. Not only one that films the outside of your vehicle, but the inside. There are three-way dash cams. I've been seeing on like Amazon, they're called like Rideshare dash cams, where they record the front of your car, the back of your car, and the inside of your car, and with audio. I'm telling you, have these. Because one, even ignoring what's going on inside of your car, if like someone hits you, and again, the more that you're on the road, the more likely you are to get into an accident. And again, these are rare, but they're having reports of people like say like, someone hits you, and then they say it's you, and it becomes this like, well, he said this, but she said this situation. It happened to one of my friends. She was driving, and some lady rear-ended her. The lady's claim was that she or my friend backed into her and reversed into her, and went to court. Actually went to court, and the judge said, hey, you know what? I hate to say it, like, I don't know who's right or who's wrong here. Like, I don't have any evidence. I don't have any proof. You guys fix your own cars. That's the best way to do it, right? If she had a dash cam, she could have proved that. And there's been stories of people making stuff up. They show the dash cam footage, and they're like, oh, actually, never mind, right? I almost look at a dash cam very similar to insurance, where hopefully you never have to use it. You never have to use it, but it's there just in case. And in addition to that, inside of your vehicle. This is a big thing, talking, like I say, about deactivation, for example. Let's say you get into a dispute with a passenger. Let's say a passenger does something and it becomes another word type game where it's your word versus theirs. You have that footage. Now, one thing I will say as well, which again is kind of unfortunate. I know sometimes on these kind of points, it seems a bit dismal or dim or a bit negative or pessimistic, but I do want to be honest. There's a lot of good things about being a driver. There's a lot of bad things, but bad things can happen. And in these cases, if let's say you get into a dispute with a passenger and becomes, you could tell just this odd tension, I always suggest contact Uber and Lyft first. I think this is anything more like psychology where, if let's say you get in a dispute with a passenger and you don't do anything and they get out and they say, oh, my driver did X, Y, and Z. And then you get a call and Uber is like, hey, we're going to deactivate your account. We heard that you did this and this. And you're on the defensive. And you're like, wait, no. That was them. I didn't do that. And now you have to defend yourself. However, if let's say you contact Uber and Lyft first and you say, hey, I just want to let you know, I just had a passenger. They did this and this. I just want to let you know right away as we got into a dispute. They were being unreasonable. They were being X, Y, and Z. I just want to let you know that's a good approach, right? But in general, talking now about, again, there's different pro tips when it comes to being a driver and some of the things you may or may not, hopefully, you may not experience as a driver. You want to have your bases covered. Right? And this is something to completely understand that rideshare insurance, I think, is almost necessary. Same thing with a dash cam. You want to make sure you're safe rather than sorry. How does it work? So with all this being said, how does the app actually work? Because this is a big thing just to understand, because I think it's important to know at least what you're getting into if you are considering driving. Here's the way it typically works. Like, so you've already signed up, you have your car situation figured out, you have your insurance in place and rideshare insurance, you have all these kind of things figured out. What is it exactly like to drive? Being honest, it's pretty easy. It's kind of, I think, not to be weird, it's kind of what you would expect. But here's the way it typically works. You turn on the app and you say go, or basically you're ready to go. What happens is the app searches in your area for a given ride that's typically close, and then it pops up. You now have the option to accept it or reject it. And I think over time, this is something you'll understand of like, okay, wait a minute, it's 3 miles of driving, it's a 10-minute drive to get there. And you start kind of doing this like Uber and Lyft math if that ride's worth it or not. And sometimes you may reject 5 rides in a row and then accept the last one, right? So you can choose to accept the ride or not. Let's say you find a good one, you accept it, it connects to your GPS, you drive, you pick them up, you say you picked up the person, you continue driving. Like I said, typically now, although it depends on the area, you have an overlapping technique where before you drop them off, Uber and Lyft will give you another ride. You can accept that one. Although keep in mind, like I said, with the huge issue of one of the big 5 negative points, there are too many drivers on the road, right? But hopefully that will get a little better. We'll have to see what happens in 2025, but that is an issue to be aware of. That being said, for most situations, you will be overlapping, and that's pretty much it. I did want to mention that because I think sometimes for any job, any profession, some people might want to know, like, okay, is there anything else that goes into it? And we'll be talking, like I said, and I have been talking about all the little nitty-gritty little things that happen behind the scenes of, like, just stuff to be aware of, like the insurance issues, the car situations, that kind of thing. But for the most part, in terms of the driving logistics, in terms of what is it like to drive, it's pretty simple. And I mean that in a really good way. I want to say that it's kind of funny. I did a video about this, and a lot of people agreed that there's something oddly addictive about driving. That it's so easy, so simple, and I'm not gonna lie, it's kind of fun. Like, it may depend upon the person, but I actually kind of love doing it in terms of, like, it's kind of fun, it's kind of addicting, where let's say it's a Friday night, I'm like, okay, I can either go out, drink, or I can go out and drive it. I think I saw this meme one time that was like, I'm going to stay in tonight. And it's like your wallet and your liver like this, right? And I think like sometimes on a Friday night, I'm like, wait, I can either go out, drink, or just stay in and do nothing and watch Netflix. Or I can go out, drive, come back, not drink, so it's healthier for me, but also I make money. Not only am I spending money, not only am I not spending money, but I'm making money. It's like a double win, right? Like, and that's great. So there is something that's all addictive about it. And I think the good thing about Uber and Lyft, not just with the low barrier to entry, like I talked about, is one of the big 5 positive points, but it's pretty easy. I mean, if you've been driving for a while, it's the same thing as driving. You know, the logistics are pretty much the same as you could typically expect of you just follow the app. The app makes it very easy for you. It makes it very seamless, very, very intuitive. I will say the apps are pretty good. And I will say in the description below, I have 2 different videos, kind of a similar style, where it's basically hacks in the Uber app you probably didn't know and hacks in the Lyft app you probably didn't know. Suggest watching both of those because, of course, sign up with both apps. That way you can know all the tricks. And I will say there are actually, I will not be talking about these in this video just because I want to focus on the nitty-gritty of what you need to know, but there are actually a lot of features in the apps to really optimize your income, optimize how you drive, when you drive. There's features that can make things a lot better. So I suggest watching those videos if you are going to be driving, because I will not be talking about that in this video. I'm going to try to talk about some tips here and there, but for the most part, keep it about what you should know if you're considering driving or not. But when it comes to this, I do want to mention it as something that, being honest, it's pretty awesome to drive in terms of the logistics. That being said, ignoring the logistics of the technical aspects, if I call it that, of driving, what are the people like? Number 7, the people. This is a big one that I feel like, oddly enough, in addition to money, is actually the other biggest reason why some drivers considering driving, but also, I might even say in the opposite end, a lot of people consider, no, I'm not going to drive. I don't want to deal with people. Now, first off, I'm going to say a couple of different things. One, by definition, Uber and Lyft and ride-sharing is a social thing. You're not computer programming or whatever. You are doing something that involves being around other people. So one, I do want to mention that. Keep in mind, it is a social activity, right? And I've even talked to some people, which is kind of cool, who said, yeah, I remember I heard from one driver, they drove in Miami, and they're like, yeah, I actually drove in Miami to understand the roads better and meet new people. I've heard some people saying, yeah, I drove because I've social anxiety or I'm more of an introvert, and Uber and Lyft kind of gets me out of my shell. It's a way for me to kind of, without any pressure, stress, I guess, to meet new people. And it's not awkward me saying, hi, how's your day? So again, there's some positive aspects of that. Might as well mention that when it comes to Uber and Lyft. But one, just keep in mind, it is a social thing. 2, though, especially now in 2025, you don't have to be social per se if you don't want to. There's been numerous times I got an Uber Lyft and I said, hey, what's up? And they're like, hey, and they have like an earbud in their ear and they're just talking to one of their friends. They're really having a conversation on the phone as they're driving. Now, for me, I don't really care. I'm like, hey, if I get there safe, point A to point B, I'm good. I'm good, right? Doesn't really matter. But that just shows the way in 2025 now, I think for most people and most drivers, I think back in the day, especially with Lyft, they were kind of really pushing, like, it's not when you get there, but how you get there. This idea of having like candy and snacks in your car, which, by the way, you don't have to do that anymore. I want to say that. I know that's a question I get a lot. You don't need candy. You don't need snacks. You don't need gum. You don't need mints. You don't need goodies. Just have those ones that I said before, like the phone mount, dash cam, etc. You don't really need all these goodies. But in addition, I think in addition to that, there's this thing where like, oh, you have to have a good conversation. You want to make sure it's a very lively conversation. Now, though, especially in 2025, I think it's more common than ever. If someone gets in the car, they kind of do the formalities. Like, hey, how's your day going so far? Good, how about you? Good. Okay. You start driving, the person goes right to their phone. That's what's going to happen in 75, 80, 90% of rides. Now, of course, like anything, getting to the third part of the people, you do feel it out. There are some people who you're going to tell want to talk, especially on Friday and Saturday nights. And I will be talking about drunk people. Don't worry, I know that's a big question. On Friday and Saturday nights, maybe a bit more lively, but you'll feel it out. Some people want to talk more, some people want to talk less. And I think this is just reading people, human psychology, but for most people, they will just go to their phone. With that being said, how are the people in general? Pretty awesome. I'm not going to lie. Because I know this is a big thing a lot of people are worried about, having people in their car, in their own personal space. Is someone going to be rude? I'd say for the most part, you really don't have to worry about rude people, aggravating people. And I know there's some drivers being like, whoa, Mark. here's the thing. If you look at the statistics and all that kind of stuff, I find, especially my personal experience, and also everyone's situation is different. It is a roll of the dice that for the most part, people are pretty awesome. They get in the car, you talk with them, maybe you don't, and they leave. For 99% of people. Now, yes, there are those 1% that are rude or mean or whatever, a bit of a hassle, but those are far and few between, I have found. Now, talking specifically about drunk people and Friday and Saturday nights, this is a big thing a lot of drivers want to know, especially before they start driving. Because they're like, hey, Mark, I want to drive, but I don't want anyone puking in my car. This is something you hear all the time. Like, they're like, hey, I want to drive. When it comes to should I drive or shouldn't, maybe I shouldn't because I don't have anyone puking in my car. For me, I love driving on Friday and Saturday nights. And I know it's this odd paradox for drivers because you're like, hey, typically, almost always, Friday and Saturday nights are going to pay the most amount of money. And events too, like I said, concerts. But these all usually revolve around alcohol. And so it's this paradox where you're like, okay, I want to drive because I'm going to make the most amount of money. But I also don't because I don't want to deal with drunk people. They're going to be annoying. They're going to be rude. They're going to be obnoxious. They're going to probably want to stop and get fast food. They might puke in my car, So I will say as a pro tip, you can have puke bags. I know some drivers do have that just in case. But here's the thing. For me personally, knock on wood again, I never had anyone puke in my car. Not once, not ever. However, one of my friends, she was driving her second ever ride, she picked up a girl and she kept having to stop because the girl kept having to puke. And this was on a Saturday morning too. So keep in mind, the puking situation could happen anytime, right? I guess she had a pretty rough night and the next morning she kept having to puke. Luckily, she did not puke in my friend's car, but my friend was a bit worried, being like, all right, hey, you good? And she goes, yeah, I may need to stop again. Could you stop and pull over? I need to puke again. And she's like, hey, no problem. We've all been there, so. But I will say, things like puking and that kind of stuff, I find are far and few between. Again, just in my personal experience. And I think when it comes to people, most people are respectful and everything. I think the biggest thing you have to worry about, if I had to give you the honest thing, one, the people that can be the most difficult to deal with are going to be on Friday and Saturday nights. And I know that's unfortunate, but you're dealing with people who are drunk. It's just part of driving, right? I mean, I hate to say it. Second thing is people drinking in the car. This is something that is really annoying because some people who are, I don't know what they're thinking, will actually open up a beer. Or in Boston, we call them nips. Nips are these small bottles of alcohol, typically called minis or miniatures, shooters, airplane bottles, ponies, 50s. I've heard a bunch of different names of them around the country. They may have some nips. And there was one time I was driving and the guy was like just ripping a nip in the backseat. I'm like, dude, what are you doing? Like, you don't do that, right? Because open container laws and all that kind of stuff. But also, and this is what becomes a very tricky thing as a driver, the biggest thing and the biggest, I think, annoyance I had on Friday and Saturday nights is bottles. Where people bring, let's say, a Sprite bottle, and it's 3 people sitting in the back seat, and they're passing around, they're giggling, they're going out to the club or the bar, good for them, and they're passing around a Sprite bottle, and it says Sprite on it, and I can see it's carbonated, but obviously, I'm not dumb. And it's like, okay, on one end, I'm like, I know that no one passes around a Sprite bottle and coughs a little bit after drinking Sprite. Like, I'm not dumb, but at the same time, how do I police that? Like, it is maybe an open container, maybe not. Maybe they are potentially passing around a bottle of Sprite before the club. But also, it becomes tricky because I'm like, okay, I'm 99% sure, and I'm 99% sure that's alcohol. I'm not stupid. Like, I mean, let's be honest. And that becomes a tricky thing. So I think that's the second thing that I see dealing with people can be annoying is this odd kind of thing of like, do I call them out for it or not? It probably is alcohol, but I don't know. I don't want to call them out on it and maybe they give me a bad rating, or do I cause a big commotion? That's kind of another annoying thing with people. And then lastly, number 3, I'd say for me personally, the most annoying thing is the drive-thru, especially here in LA. In case you've never been to In-N-Out, to quote Tom Segura, get your life together. In-N-Out's amazing. By far the best fast food burger on the planet. That's a hill I'm willing to die on. I know some people say Five Guys, but I don't consider Five Guys like fast food. I don't put it in the same category, but subject for a different video. If you've never been to In-N-Out, the car line, if you know, you know, can easily be like 20 or 30 minutes wait. It's insane. So if I'm, like, say, driving, and someone's like, hey, I'm really hungry, and it's Friday night, and they're drunk, and they want to get In-N-Out, it's tough because I'm like, I don't want to say no and be rude, but also, I also am like, shoot, if I say yes, I'm going to be waiting literally probably 20 minutes in this car line while it's surging, while I could be making way more money. And in case you didn't know, as a driver, you typically almost always will make the least amount of money when you're not moving. you're getting literally pennies every minute or whatever. It's just not worth it. And especially with the drive-thru, not only do you have to worry about just the logistics of getting the food, and you're like, all right, fine, I'll stop the drive-thru. There's no one there, fine, okay, I'll do it. But 2, people are going to be eating it probably in your car, so your car is going to smell. And then 3, people spilling stuff in your car. Even if it's not on purpose, they're drunk, they're inebriated, they want Jack in the Box or McDonald's or Taco Bell or whatever. They're inebriated in your car, it's going to smell bad. So that, I think, is like the 3 big things when it comes to the passengers that you do have to worry about. But for the most part, when it comes to the people, it's pretty awesome. And I'm not going to lie, I actually, like I said, I do kind of enjoy being around people like that. Like, if anything, I preferred, like I said, Friday and Saturday nights because I like the lively people, the people being excited to go out, they're in a good mood. Like, doing the morning commutes can be good because you don't really have to worry about, one, as much people being obnoxious or puking in your car, although you never know, like I said with my friend on that Saturday morning. But during the week, you don't have to worry about that. 2, sometimes the surges in the morning can be insane because people are like, shoot, I need to get to work. You don't have to get to the club at a certain time unless there's like a cutoff. But like when it comes to going to work, you really have to get to work. So people will spend whatever. But also, the thing with morning commutes is that people usually like really dismal, right? Like I said, I mean, no one's excited to go to work unless you love what you do. And there were so many times I had conversations of people like, yeah, I'm not gonna lie. Remember one story, I've mentioned this in a few videos. I started talking to this guy and he goes, hey man, I just had a kid. Work sucks right now. And as a result of work sucking so bad, I can't stay home and just hang out with my son. I don't want to talk the rest of the ride. I'm like, point taken. I won't say anything. I'll just drop you off, right? And I find people are way in just a worse mood in the morning. So again, this does depend, but pros and cons. Friday, Saturday nights, you could roll the dice and get people potentially puking in your car or being obnoxious with the bottles, like passing around a bottle of Sprite. But also, surges. And vice versa when it comes to morning commutes. I did not like the people on morning commutes. They weren't bad. It's just no one's in a good mood to go to work, right? So again, all these pros and all these cons, but for the most part, I know I'm kind of giving you a lot of different lore when it comes to being a driver and what to kind of expect. People are pretty awesome, pretty easygoing. Number 8, other alternatives. So with all this being said, with the car situation, the people, how much money you can potentially make, what is it like to drive, the big 4 or some of the big 5 positives, and the big 5 negatives, one thing I want to bring up on this point is, well, why not something else? This is something I touched upon a bit in the beginning of this video because I want to say this. When I ask people, like, what do you want to do? They usually have an answer, like, oh, I want to do X, Y, or Z. But when I ask them why, I'm like, okay, can you get that benefit doing something else? So just to give you an interesting example, a lot of people have told me that they want to do remote work because they want to travel. They're like, I can work from home, I can work anywhere I want, and that's why I want to do that because I want to travel. But then part of me wants to ask the question, well, what if you do a job that involves traveling? What if you do, and there's a lot of these contract positions that they're like, hey, we need someone, I know this is a big thing in accounting. There's something called account temps in the accounting world, or Robert Half account temps, where you can get contract positions. And they're like, hey, we need an auditor for only 3 months in Honolulu, Hawaii, and we'll give you a $500 a month or $1,000 a month stipend for your rent or something like that. I'm like, hey, as opposed to getting a remote job, why not just do that? That allows you to travel and blah, blah, blah. Now, bringing that point back to here, one thing I want to say is this. There's a lot of benefits to being a driver, like I talked about, the big 5. There's also a lot of cons, the big 5 as well, on the other side. And one thing I've mentioned a lot throughout this video is you have to spend money to make money. That, in my opinion, is probably one of the most annoying things about Uber and Lyft, among a lot of different things. And I say this because, let's say, and again, I know for most people, they're like, hey, I want to have that flexible schedule. I want to have the flexibility of working whenever I want, however I want, on my own dime, on my own accord, with no quota and all this kind of stuff. And I get that. But is there any way you can really look at your schedule, look at why you want to drive, and do something else? To give an example, I just talked about In-N-Out. Great place. Not only great burgers, but a great place to work. I think In-N-Out's one of the best places to work, period, because I think you get benefits like part-time. I believe after like 90 days, you get benefits. And you get benefits as a part-time employee, which is pretty ridiculous. I don't know if any other, I think maybe Starbucks does that. I'm not sure. I'm not sure exactly. So don't quote me on that. But it's something like, it now has like benefits if you if you work part-time. And here's the thing. There's some like terms when it comes to In-N-Out where I think you get something like $24 an hour. Or so. It's something ridiculous. It's something pretty insane. And part of me says, if you're actually looking for a secondary job, and I know Uber and Lyft is awesome when it comes to flexibleness, if that's the best way to word it. It's pretty awesome with that. But the amount that In-N-Out workers are getting paid right now, is about the exact same amount that Uber and Lyft drivers are getting paid. And to add something on top of that, as an in-and-out worker, you don't pay for the maintenance on your vehicle. I guess you have to commute there and back, right? But you don't have to pay for the maintenance on your vehicle. You don't have to constantly be getting gas. You don't have to worry about the depreciation on your car. You don't have to worry about getting extra rideshare insurance or in-and-out insurance or whatever. You just work. And I will say, which I'm not really going to talk about too much on this video, but I will touch upon it, is taxes. Remember, when you're driving for Uber and Lyft, you are an independent contractor, which means you make good money. You're like, oh, this is great. I'm making good money. But then at the end of the year, especially if you're driving full time, you're like, wait, you owe money. And a lot of people are not used to that. I want to stress I'm a former accountant, but I'm not your accountant. I'll also say that. But what's most likely going to happen is the IRS can be like, hey, you owe us $3, $4, $5 grand. And you're like, wait, I get money back. And they're like, no. When you're an employee, you get money back because you typically get taxes taken out then and there. In this case, you're an independent contractor. So with all the things I've mentioned about Uber and Lyft, of the negative points of the pay being lower, getting a percentage taken out that's bigger, like Uber and Lyft taking out more and more of your pay, inflation, you then realize, like, okay, at the end of the day, I only made $20 an hour, and then I walked away with 16 because Uber and Lyft took a certain amount an hour. Let's say you walk away with $15 in that 1 hour. But then you also realize, I have depreciation on my car. I have maintenance. I have to pay for gas. So that gets lower. And then you're like, wait a minute. I have to pay taxes on this. This is not taxed, at least not yet, right? So that can be a whole thing, right? A whole other can of worms that I've done a lot of videos about it right now, about taxes and tax deductions and all this kind of stuff. So I do suggest watching those videos because, as Benjamin Franklin said, the two things that are certain in life, death and taxes. And if the Uber driver and Lyft driver, taxes can maul you if you're not used to things like write-offs and keeping track of your records. Whole other thing that I want to say for a different video, to be honest, and I have done videos about this. That being said, bring this now back to the in-and-out example. Part of me says, why not just work at in-and-out? And I know that sounds a bit condescending, being like, you want to drive for Lyft and Uber? Just be a fast food worker. But no. In-and-out is insane. Like I said, you're going to probably make, if I do the math out, involving the average hourly rate of drivers, involving the maintenance on your car, the gas that you're going to constantly be spending, the depreciation on your car, and then taxes and all this kind of stuff, I'd say on average, the average in-and-out worker makes more money, even as a level cashier, burger flipper, or I don't know what the term is, I'll call them chef, in-and-out chefs. They probably make more money than an Uber Lyft driver. If I put my money on either one, I would say almost 100% certain that an in-and-out worker, on average, with everything factored in, has a higher hourly wage than a rideshare wage than a rideshare driver. And that's pretty alarming, right? And so this is why I say to a lot of people that, with all these things being considered, and I'm giving you and this is why I structured this video. I know it's a bit long, I know it's a bit lengthy, but I wanted to structure this video as in, here's everything you need to know. You make the decision, right? Obviously, my main mindset is probably yes. I think especially in 2025, it is worth it to drive, but I'm letting you know everything because there's a lot to being a driver. There's a lot of pros, there's a lot of cons, there's all these other things that maybe you don't know about. And with that being said, I think one thing I have to bring up on this point, on point number 8, is with all these logistics I've talked about, I mean, do you even think in-and-out is going to be actually a better alternative for you? Because in my mind, the only thing I think with Uber and Lyft, you look at a lot of other positions as well, with Uber and Lyft that really stands out is the flexible schedule. However, there are some jobs, to pick another one, that require data entry. And they're like, you just need a high school diploma. You're doing data entry. It's probably going to be very boring. I'm going to be honest, a bit boring. But you can work remotely. And they're like, hey, and a lot of jobs are like this now. They're like, hey, if you get your sugar honey iced tea done, if you get your stuff done, we don't care. However you do it, whenever you do it, as long as you get it done. And like, say it's like 40 hours a week. Well, that's kind of similar to Uber and Lyft. It's like you have a data entry job, very low barrier to entry, like a high school diploma or GED. And then it's remote, so you can work whenever you want, however you want. And they're like, hey, as long as you get this data entry done by this Friday at 5 p.m., however you do it, work on your own schedule. Just make sure it's done. Just make sure it hits or gets submitted before that deadline. That is a flexible schedule. And that has all the benefits of being a driver. And I want to say this not to deter people from being a driver. I want to stress that because I'm not going to lie. It is a lot more work, in my opinion, getting a job at In-N-Out. It's very competitive, actually. I know it sounds like it's not, but it is very competitive to get a job at In-N-Out. Finding these data entry jobs and other jobs that have a good hourly wage while also being remote, while also being a bit flexible in the sense of if you get it done however you can on your own dime. just make sure it's done at this deadline. Those are a bit harder to find. And signing up as a driver is a lot easier. I'm going to be honest. That being said, I do just want to mention this as a point because if let's say you're considering, should I drive, shouldn't I drive? And you're like, oh man, throughout this video, you've talked about a lot of bad things. I didn't know that there's this much that goes into being a driver, which is why I go very in depth every year on these videos, because there is a lot that a lot of people don't think about or don't know about. And I think it's one situation where you may say, wow, this is a lot, but I just want a flexible schedule. You could probably get that same benefit that you want from Uber and Lyft somewhere else. You want to make 20 to 25 an hour. You could probably get that somewhere else. And again, I'm not trying to bash Uber and Lyft here. I just want to give you the full scope of things. But I think sometimes when it comes to driving for Uber and Lyft, people think too like, oh, should I drive or shouldn't I drive for Uber and Lyft? But I need a flexible job. I need a secondary job. And then they realize, like, wait a minute, there's all these other jobs. There's a whole new world of jobs that do exist that gives you all the benefits of Uber and Lyft without all the negatives. Number 9, worker classification. This one is a big one, especially in 2025. And to kind of call back what I talked about a bit earlier in this video, is Uber and Lyft right now is in this new category of not being an employee, not being an independent contractor, but an independent contractor with benefits. This is what I would look out for in your area. Because I'm assuming if you watch the video up until this point, and I know it's a bit of a lengthy video, if you've watched it up into this point, you are probably considering should you drive or not. Of course, right? But in addition, you may be leaning towards one side or the other. But one thing I think that should be something to consider in your area, because like I said, your location is the number one factor that determines how much money you can make. And this is based off the logistics, the layout, all this kind of stuff. But one big aspect to that I've not talked about yet is the status of the worker classification for rideshare drivers. Here in California, something passed called Prop 22. Well, now workers have, when it comes to driving for Uber and Lyft, rideshare drivers, rideshare workers have a minimum wage. They now get benefits here in California. In addition, Minnesota just passed something. Well, now there's a minimum amount in terms of the base fare and all this kind of stuff. And then Massachusetts, which in my opinion, Massachusetts, ironically, I was from Boston or drove in Boston first and everything. And I grew up in Massachusetts. Massachusetts has, in my opinion, the best state logistics and laws and legislation for rideshare drivers. Drivers now have paid sick leave. They have unemployment. They have benefits. They have a minimum hourly wage. In addition, which is kind of crazy and pretty awesome, they just passed unions. Uber and Lyft unions and rideshare unions are now going to exist in Massachusetts, and of course, specifically in the Boston area, because Boston is the best city to drive in Massachusetts when it comes to making money for Uber and Lyft. And I gotta be honest, if let's say you live in one of these other states and you're like, hey, Mark, I don't know, I'm just on the fence about driving or not, this is something I'd look into. Because let's say if you're in Minnesota, for example, you're probably way better off now driving than ever before after this new laws and all these laws and legislation passed. This is a big thing I'd suggest to a lot of people to look into, because this is something, I'm going to be honest, in 2025 that will be a huge thing to be aware of. Now, like I mentioned right in the beginning of this video, as the first point of the current status of Uber and Lyft, I said things are getting better, and I do think they are. But I think one of the big reasons, like the big caveats or the big aspects of why they're getting better is because just in general, people are realizing like, wow, drivers are being taken advantage of by Uber and Lyft. They are being treated pretty badly. They're really not making that much money at all. Uber and Lyft is kind of treating them like slaves, and it's getting really, really, really bad. You know what? California just passed this thing. Minnesota just passed this thing. Massachusetts just passed this thing. Maybe we should follow suit because we want to protect our drivers in our state, in our county, in our city, in our area in general. And this is a big thing that is changing a lot. And I mean this in such a positive way. And that's why I feel like in 2025, it's never been more imperative to look at the worker classification and if there's anything happening or potentially coming out on the horizon. Because in some cases, in some areas, I would say, hey, you know what? Don't drive. Given everything I know about this one area, the logistics, the average hourly rate, all this kind of stuff, how many people is in that given area, the population, et cetera, the road layouts even, maybe it's not worth it to drive. But if a new law passes that gives you a minimum hourly guarantee, it gives you protection, it gives you et cetera, my answer might go from saying that you shouldn't drive, and it might actually shift to, actually, you know what? You should drive. And this is a big thing to look out for. And I'm predicting it now. I've said it already a couple times on this video and other videos that I've posted on this channel. I feel like 2025 is going to be the year that things really start happening for rideshare drivers, because I feel like in the past few years, people didn't really understand when it comes to Uber and Lyft, how bad they were being treated by Uber and Lyft. Hate to be blunt. I think Uber and Lyft has done a lot of amazing things in terms of ride sharing. It's taken over the world. It's reduced DUIs a tremendous amount. It's added millions of new jobs, both for workers directly for Uber and Lyft, but also the drivers. There's a lot of benefits that Uber and Lyft has provided and has done. Uber and Lyft has done a lot of good stuff. Can't deny that. They've also done a lot of bad stuff, and I'm honest about that too. And I feel like for the past few years, they just did not treat their drivers the best. Now, though, in 2025, that's coming to light. And I've said this in so many other videos that when one thing happens in one state in the country, it becomes this ripple effect or this breadcrumb effect that other states start looking at what they're doing and saying, hey, they're kind of right. Something just doesn't add up. For example, in Massachusetts, there was an auditor that did a whole audit. Shout out to the auditor. I should be an auditor, by the way. That's what my position was as an accountant. And they determined that Uber and Lyft owed hundreds of millions of dollars to the state of Massachusetts because they did all this messed up stuff. And as you can imagine, as a state, money talks. Let's be honest, money talks. The almighty dollar always talks. Other states would say, hey, wait a minute. Massachusetts just got hundreds of millions of dollars from Uber and Lyft because this auditor found out that they did this and this. What if we audit them too? What if we do the same? And although, yeah, they may be going into it and probably are to make more money, just to get more money, because you wouldn't want more money, the good positive ripple effect of that is that this is now affecting drivers in a positive way and benefiting drivers. This is something to be mind-blowingly aware of, especially in your area, in your county, your state, your city, etc., basically where you live, because this is something that could very easily switch, from my perspective, or maybe for yours, it could very easily switch the I shouldn't drive given the situation to now I should drive. Number 10, testing the waters. With all this being said, of all these points I brought up, all these logistics, the worker classification, everything, at the end of the day, I'm going to be honest, test the waters out. That's what I'm going to say, because I know a lot of people say, hey, Mark, shouldn't I drive? I have my own car, I have a driver's license, I have a clean driving record. Should I drive, shouldn't I drive? And I say, you know what? Here are all these factors you need to know. And I've mentioned them and laid them out in this video. I've laid out a ton of different factors, pros, cons, everything. But at the end of the day, I say to a lot of people, like, you know what? You don't know until you try. You may start driving for Uber and Lyft and hate it and say, you know what? I am never driving again. You might start driving and say, you know what? I actually love this. And I'm going to be honest, I love driving more than I expected when I first started driving. At first, I'm like, hey, it's a way to make flexible income. That's the way I looked at it. I was hustling on YouTube and music, and I got to be honest, YouTube and music changed my life. And in addition to that, I think Uber and Lyft was a huge catalyst. The fact that I had a flexible schedule, I could work whenever I wanted. Like, it was a massive way for me to work whenever I wanted, however I wanted on music. And in those gaps when I was not producing or making YouTube videos, I could drive for Uber and Lyft, right? And I loved it, not just in terms of the benefits of being a driver, but the actual work itself. Like, I love meeting new people, hanging out, and even on like a Friday and Saturday night, I remember being like, hey, you know what? Sometimes when I drive, not only am I not drinking, so I'm healthy, I'm also not, spending a ton of money on alcohol. And ironically, I'm not spending money taking Ubers and Lyfts. I am the driver. I actually found that when I get back, sometimes after driving on a Friday or Saturday night, I'd actually kind of have that itch scratched, that I kind of felt like I went out, right? So I say all this because one thing I say to a lot of people is just test the waters. You may be on the fence and be like, I don't know. Just try it out. I don't want to stress. I'm not saying that because I work for Uber and Lyft. I have no affiliation with the companies. Said that before, I might as well say it again. But here's the thing though. You could start driving and it could fit your schedule perfectly. It could also not. And the good thing, like I said, way in the beginning, talking about the positive points, the big 5 positives, is there's no quota. Also, it is free to sign up. I might as well mention that. I feel like most people probably know that, but it's completely free. You sign up on the apps, you submit your application, you may have to do like a car inspection or whatever, but you pretty much sign up completely for free. And you could sign up, drive for a week, do 10 rides, and you're like, no, never again. I'm never driving for Uber and Lyft again. You could do 10 rides and be like, yeah, I kind of like this. Now, one thing I do have to mention, though, about signing up, testing the waters, is the sign-on bonus. In case you didn't know, the sign-on bonuses are insane. Now, when I signed up to drive for Uber and Lyft, they were doing in Boston at the time a $1,000 sign-on bonus. You signed up, you got $1,000. Guess how much money I got when I signed up? Nothing. The main reason why is in order to get that sign-on bonus, you need to use someone's code or their referral link. You have to use one. I want to stress, if you're already thinking it, I'm not saying that to use my code or my referral link. I'm just saying that in general, that if you're going to sign up, use someone's code. You can Google a code. I have mine in the description. If you want to click it, you don't have to. You can use your friends. Maybe text one of your friends saying, hey, you have a Lyft referral link, because in case you didn't know, if someone refers you to drive, you get a bonus and they get a bonus, right? So you could text one of your friends, like however you want to do it. Just make sure if you are going to sign up, you use someone's code. Because like I said, I regretted it. I should have just Googled Uber sign up code, or like texted one of my friends who was already driving for Uber or Lyft. Should have done that. I didn't. I missed out on that $1,000. And I also missed out, I think it was $750. I think it was $1,000 for Uber, $750 for Lyft. I can't remember, or maybe vice versa. I can't remember. Basically, I missed out on a good amount of money because I did not use anyone's code. Now, when it comes to signing up, if you want to get that sign-on bonus, 3 things I want to say, which is kind of cool. One is you have to sign up and use someone's code. 2, you have to hit the requirements. So typically it's a certain amount of rides within 30 days. So in your area, it does depend, area to area changes. They might say, hey, you have to do 100 rides in your first 30 days as a driver, and you get this $1,200 bonus. And there's some bonuses that I've seen as high as $1,500. On average, I'd say the average Uber driver and Lyft driver does about 2 rides an hour. So let's say if they say 100 rides in the first 30 days, you have to drive typically about 50 hours. That's what I would guess is 50 hours, give or take. That's probably what I say is about 50 hours. Again, it does depend. And this is all or nothing. So I do want to say that if let's say you're at 99 rides and it goes to day 31, you get nothing. It's all or nothing. So keep that in mind. And lastly, number 3, and this is something I say to a lot of drivers, just as like a cool little pro tip, is you can get that sign-on bonus and then leave right after. So let's say if you drive, you're like, hey, you know what? I'm going to treat this sign-on bonus as my trial run. I'm going to do 100 rides, and then at the end of that, determine, do I like it or not? No, of course. Not only do you get that sign-on bonus, you still get the money from those rides. Might as well say that the sign-on bonus is in addition to all that money that you make when driving. Let's say you get that sign-on bonus, you get a $1,250 sign-on bonus after completing the requirements, and you're like, you know what? Okay, that's cool. I did 100 rides. It was interesting. I learned a lot, and maybe you didn't, but it's not for me. You could just stop driving. I think that's also why they have those requirements. So Uber says, hey, we're not just going to give you money for signing up. At least do some rides, and then we'll give you some money. I think that's their mindset. But keep that in mind. These sign-on bonuses, especially if you're looking to drive a lot, can be insane. And now a bonus point, and that is delivery driving. Jumping back to the beginning of this video when I talk about requirements and the new requirements, which I think, again, is so unfortunate. It's frustrating. 25 and up for both Uber and Lyft. However, when it comes to delivery driving, it does depend. It does depend on the type of vehicle. You can either do delivery driving on foot. Yes, that exists. Probably only in like New York, I feel like is the only place I can really see that working. Maybe Boston, definitely not LA. LA is like the least walkable city. Maybe not the least, but maybe Chicago, I don't know. But you could do Uber Eats or DoorDash on foot. You can also do it with a bicycle, like an actual bicycle or a motorized scooter, or of course a vehicle like a car. And depending on which one you use, it does depend on the age. This also depends area to area, so keep that in mind. But typically, you could be looking at 18 and up or 19 and up. So let's say if you're in college, I think is a really cliche example of this. You're under 25, you're in college, you want something that has the benefits of Uber and Lyft. I suggest doing delivery driving. Now, I have to be honest, being very transparent, I hated doing delivery driving when I drove. I hated it with a passion. I just didn't like the fact that I had to pull up, throw on my hazards, hope I don't get a ticket, hope that my car doesn't get hit. I'm in the middle of the city, run in, make sure I grab the right order, make sure I don't forget their milkshake or their soda, God forbid. Come to my car, put it on the ground, hope it doesn't spill. Hopefully I get there in time, because even if, like, say, I get there in time, maybe the food is left out early and it's now cold and some of that falls back on me. I don't know. I did not like delivery driving. However, I know some people who love it. The fact that, in case you didn't know, you can have someone in the car with you. You can have passengers when doing delivery driving. I don't know how they work that out, if the person with you just doesn't get any money or they just hang out with you. I don't know. But you can have people with you. In addition, some people are like, hey, I don't deal with people. I'd much rather throw on my earbuds, listen to a podcast or music. I just do delivery driving. I don't have to talk to anybody. I don't have to deal with anybody. I don't have to have anybody in my car. It's also, in my opinion, if I had to look at the Murphy's Law, probably a lot safer in this fact that you're not having random people in your car. And of course, that increases the chances of something happening. Although accidents are so common as a delivery driver, right? So there are pros and cons. But one thing I will say, ignore the pros and cons on rideshare driving versus delivery driving, is one thing that's very by the book, not just subjective, but objective. The requirements. And the requirements to be a delivery driver are way more minimal than a rideshare driver. And in case you didn't know, it's a cool little fun fact. If you sign up to be an Uber driver, it also signs you up to be an Uber Eats driver. And in case you didn't know, Uber bought Postmates, so it technically includes Postmates as well. And so what's good about this is if, let's say you're like, hey, I'm going to try out delivery driving on the Uber app, and I've done videos about how to do this, you could select only deliveries and you do Uber Eats. And then let's say if you're like, yeah, you know what, not for me, I'm gonna switch back to ride sharing, you can switch back to ride sharing. But if let's say you don't fit those requirements, A, let's say you're under 25, you can just do delivery driving to get a lot of the benefits of being a rideshare driver. But B, when it comes to being a delivery driver, is not only is it the requirements for you, but also your vehicle. If let's say you have a two-door vehicle, yeah, you can't really drive for Uber or Lyft, but you can still be a delivery driver, right? As long as that food gets here, it gets here. Or let's say, I've said this before in some videos, let's say you're like, look, man, I'm broke. I can't rent a car. I can't afford it. All I have is this bicycle. Hey, you could still use your bicycle to deliver. Now, of course, I do think you need to be in a hot spot. Like I said, like LA, New York, Chicago, a place that you can very easily get around. Or let's say if you have a motorized scooter. Let's say you're like, hey, I don't even have a car. All I have is a motorized scooter. You could still do delivery driving. It's a great way, I feel like, to get some of the benefits of Uber and Lyft and being a rideshare driver without having to worry about the requirements. And now, a second bonus point, and that is Waymo. I feel like I have to talk about this. This is my first time in any of these year recaps. Like, should you drive for Uber and Lyft in 2019? Should you drive in 2020, et cetera, et cetera? This is my first time ever bringing this up, but I feel like now I have to. And I've done some videos about Waymo already on this channel. I have an entire playlist now dedicated to Waymo videos where I talk about what is it like to be in a Waymo, the logistics using the app, the news stories about Waymo. In case you didn't know, Waymo is a self-driving vehicle / app. And I feel like I have to mention this. This is the first time I think that drivers shouldn't be worried, but be aware of self-driving cars and self-driving technology. Because in case you didn't know, here's what's going on with Waymo. It's in very select areas. It's in, I believe, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Phoenix, and I think Austin. I think just those four. Don't quote me. This obviously is going to change, unfortunately, over time, which I'll talk about in a second. But I think it's just those four, I believe. But don't quote me. Now, Waymo is with a vehicle and an app, although it depends, which I'm going to talk about as well. Things are getting dicey. And here's the idea. Very similar to Uber and Lyft, similar to ride sharing. I pull up the Waymo app, let's say here in LA, and I take Waymo's now. I pull up the app, I hit a button. It comes, it picks me up, and drops me off. And it's a self-driving vehicle. No one else is with you in the car. It's kind of trippy. Like, I did a video about what it's like to be in a Waymo, and I did a vlog-style video where I got in a Waymo for the first time. And it was trippy. It kind of felt like a movie scene. Like, the steering wheel was turning on its own. I put on blinkers and everything. There was even one time where like we were driving and a guy was about to cross and he stopped and then did this. He waved and the Waymo went. So it understood the human gesture of the guy waving. And again, it's funny. I feel like in 10 years, this is going to seem kind of funny, but like, I feel like it's one of those things like, I heard this about the microwave, that when the microwave first came out, people didn't trust it. They're like, wait, I hit a button and in a minute my food's hot? No way. This is witchcraft. It's witchcraft. It's it's demon magic. I don't know. It's black magic. And with a Waymo, it's super trippy. Like, I remember even the first time I took one, people were coming up to me because I was sitting shotgun, no one else in the car. So it looks almost kind of like a prank. And I was sitting shotgun, and people were coming up to the car being like, oh my gosh, the Waymo. And this is in like June or July of 2024. So like, Waymos are still so new. I actually met a guy, which is kind of funny how I got invited. I got put on the wait list and got accepted because I met a photographer who's doing photos for Google. Google, I think it owns Waymo, or they're associated. And he's doing photos for Waymo and for Google. And I was like, hey, can I join? He goes, yeah, I do this and this. And then so I got accepted. So I was able to be like one of the first people I knew, actually the first person I knew to be able to take a Waymo. It is trippy. And I say all of this because, one, like I said, it's an app in a car and it operates just like Uber and Lyft. Exactly like Uber and Lyft. And I've done some videos about the pros and the cons, but I think a big thing right now, which is unfortunate, Waymos are now starting to be significantly cheaper than Uber and Lyft. Not by a ton, I might as well say. Maybe significantly is a bit of hyperbole, a bit of an exaggeration, but they are cheaper. And for most people, when they go to order as passengers in Uber or Lyft, they say, okay, I'm going to pull up Uber, I'm going to pull up Lyft. Which one's cheaper? Let's take that one. Now, though, people are starting to do, let me pull up Uber, let me pull up Lyft, let me pull up Waymo and see which one's cheaper. And a lot of times now, Waymo's starting to become more cheap. And as Waymo gets cheaper and more popular, this is something that could affect, because I already mentioned that one huge issue as one of the big 5 negative aspects of being a driver, especially in 2025, is too many drivers being on the road. But it's actually not just that. I think it goes deeper than that. It's not that there's too many drivers on the road. It's really the fact that there's not enough rides to go around. That's actually the issue. And when you now look at in LA, Phoenix, Austin, San Francisco, the fact that Waymo is now taking some of those rides. I mean, I'll be honest, I take Waymos now. And as you can imagine, me taking Waymo is one ride that's now not available to a human Uber or Lyft driver. And I know this is like Black Mirror style thinking, Twilight Zone, like sci-fi, futuristic movie, dystopian type stuff. But this is something that is happening because for a lot of people, Waymos are cheaper. They're also kind of new. It's a novelty a little bit. For me, it's kind of worn off. There are some negative aspects, though. Don't get me wrong. With Waymos, it definitely takes way longer to get there. That's the biggest thing, to be honest. I think is it takes way longer to get there, and you're by yourself. But some people might like that. In addition, there have been studies to show that Waymo's a lot safer. There's been studies to show that Waymo, I think, is something like a third less accidents, a third less traffic violations, a third less injuries when an accident does happen as a result of the self-driving technology being way more efficient and better than humans. There's a lot of things that Waymo's doing that's pretty insane. And now, the reason why I mentioned both the app and the vehicle separately, Uber just partnered with Waymo, that when you now order an Uber, I think it's in Austin specifically, not only can you get an Uber or a human driver, but you now can also get a Waymo. That to me is even wilder. That to me is even, I'm going to use the word scarier, because for me to order a Waymo now in LA, in case you didn't know, in 2025, before it was a wait list. You had to be accepted, or you need someone's special code to sign up to order a Waymo. Now anyone could just download the Waymo app, sign up and grab a Waymo, but you have to download the app to get that Waymo. However, in Austin, you can order an Uber. Like you want a human driver, or you're ordering an Uber, and a Waymo can show up. Not just the app, but now we're talking about just the vehicle itself. It's like kind of like a transformed vehicle with like cameras and sensors and all that kind of stuff. This is something just to be aware of, because with there being so little rides to go around, and the new factor and all these things I've talked about, like the insurance issues, the pay, all this kind of stuff, I'm not going to recap all of it. We've talked a lot in this video. It's been a bit of a lengthy video, I know, but I really want to go in depth on this video. With everything I've talked about, you then have to factor in the fact that Waymo is now starting to take human jobs. There's no other way to word that. Now, do I think this is something that you should be petrified of or horrified of in 2025? No, but I do think it should be on your radar that right now Waymo is just in hotspots. I don't know why it's always Phoenix. Does someone know? Maybe post that in the comments. It's like LA, okay, I get it. San Fran, okay, I get it. Austin, I kind of get it. I know it's a very up-and-coming city, and there's a lot of tech people there now, so I kind of get that one. But Phoenix, I don't know why Phoenix out of any other city. Let me know in the comments if there's actually a reason why. Maybe we'll do some research about that. But anyway, and you look at this and you see, okay, it's spreading. Back in the day with LA, this even happened like 6 months ago, not only with the wait list, but it was a small radius, meaning if I was going to take a Waymo, I had to be picked up and dropped off in this specific highlighted area. Now, though, that area has gotten bigger, and it's continue to get bigger, my guess, in 2025, meaning more and more people can now take a Waymo to go into a further area in LA proper, or the massive thing that, because LA isn't really a city, it's like a city. LA is like the term of almost like a million different cities in one. But anyway, but yeah, like the radius is getting bigger. In addition, I can see Waymo spreading to other cities. And so, like, say if you are a driver in LA or in San Francisco or in Phoenix or Austin, I think Waymo's something. At least it's something that should be on your radar as something to be aware of. I don't think we're at the point now yet where it's going to be a concern. I will say that, and I don't think 2025 it will be a concern. But I do think it's something that might affect you a little bit if you are driving in one of those cities. Because like I said, there's only a finite amount of rides to go around. And if I'm making this up, if let's say Waymo does, and I don't know what the statistics are, I have to look into it. Let's say Waymo does 100 rides a day, for example. That's now 100 less rides for the Uber and Lyft drivers. I might even say the human Uber drivers and Lyft drivers. And let's say Austin specifically, and this could spread to LA too. Like say in Austin, you're like, hey, I want to support humans. I want to go against AI. For me, I'm aggressively against AI in case you want to know. I think AI is going to be the doom to us all. I'm ultra pessimistic and negative viewing AI. Anyway, but you're like, oh, I want to take an Uber. You could still get a Waymo in Austin. And I would not be surprised if Uber and Waymo are going hand in hand and working together, if that spreads to LA and San Fran. That now for me, if I take an Uber, a Waymo could show up, even though I already have the Waymo app to order a Waymo. So again, this is something I know, a bit of a Black Mirror style thinking, Twilight Zone style thinking. Maybe not the happiest, most positive, and, enlightening things to talk about and to finish off this video with. Finishing off on probably a bit of a quasi-dark utopian no. I just want to say that as things are getting more popular, and I'd like to do these videos, and I'd like to be very transparent, especially when it comes to the current news and the current situation of ride sharing and the climate, that Waymo is something that's picking up a lot of steam. And for all my drivers out there, it's just something that you definitely, I think we're a few years away, but at least in 2025, you definitely need to be aware of.